going to New Year's Eve, 1996.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start there. Tell me about that day and when you first got a sense that this was going to be something more than just a bad rainstorm.
That's a good question. We watched the creek all the time. So the creek, our back door was out onto Kaiwanawato, and it had been rising and rising. And of course, it was a very wet year, and we were just on alert. And we had a friend that called and said, you really need to watch. It was, and so we were just paying attention. And the water was coming up, and it was coming up, and we had New Year's plans. And we went in to the store and kind of organized. We moved stuff off of the floor, just kind of a prep. There were a few other business owners on the plaza that had had experience, that had been through a prior flood, because it wasn't the first time that that had happened. And so we kind of organized, and then we went and had some food with some friends, and then we came back, and then we went and made sandbags. The city had provided a place at the city yard where you could get sandbags. So we sandbagged the back doors and the front doors, just getting ready, moved some more stuff, took some stuff out of the building. And then we went home, and then the next day we went back in, only it was a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were you allowed back on the plaza when you went back the next day?
In the morning we were, that was early, before the water actually came down. So, I mean, there was water everywhere.
Yeah,
there was
take me through the scene.
Water running down the back of the plaza, but not a lot. And the creek was full, overflowing. I don't really recall exactly the timing on when there was water in the park, but above the park, up the creek, were debris jams, some mudslides, some new construction stuff that had contributed. And at some point, the water then was going everywhere. They pulled the plug, basically. They took some big equipment up into the park, as I recall, and it caused a tidal wave. It caused a tsunami. And that just flushed everything. So all the sandbags were gone, everything. Water was going around both sides of the building. And yeah, it was a lot. Yeah, and we weren't in the buildings, of course, at that point in time. And then they did some more excavation, and were trying to funnel the water back to behind into the creek bed, but it just kind of didn't work, and the water just kept pouring into the ends of the buildings, not so much down the front now, but right into the end building. So it was big. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, when you say pull the plug, you're talking about removing some of the debris.
Debris up above, yeah.
Okay,
mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How long did it take before you were allowed to go back into your business?
It was days, yeah. So eventually everything settled down. I mean, the water ran. Kent, you can help with time. Help me here. So within 48 hours, there wasn't water flooding around the buildings. And then at that point, they told us the buildings weren't safe, so they wouldn't let us go back in. But we did some volunteer patrols, just making sure there was no looting and stuff like that. We were able to get to our front door and unlock it and push it open because it was full of water. And we put a screen up to keep stuff from coming out, but there was that continual rise of water because the water was actually coming through the walls and the floor. So
how high? I mean, is it like ankle deep?
Well, when we went in, it was about 3 feet deep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you put something up to prevent merchandise from flooding
We
out when
did.
you
We did. Yeah, yeah. Some of the stories, like on our night patrols, volunteer patrols, there would be yarn or strings, and people would go, "Oh, those are electric wires," and we'd go, "No, no, it's yarn. It came out of here."
This is the first I've heard of these citizen patrols. Take me through that a little
Well,
bit.
because things were so vulnerable. I think we have a police officer with us, or when we did it, but they asked people to help, just patrol and make sure that everything was okay, and that there wasn't any looting, which there wasn't. No, yeah.
And I had talked to a battalion chief about the, you know, slowly being allowed back in the
Yes.
buildings because of the fact that they might have been unstable or something like that.
Yes.
Can you take me through the process, how you remember that, working with engineers and stuff like that?
Well, they had a meeting. So we had a meeting, and they told us that the buildings they didn't deem that they were safe, so we couldn't go back in. And then people were very concerned. Of course, there were restaurants that had walk-ins with food in them, and all kinds of stuff that if we waited too long, everything would be worse. And finally they said, okay, you can go back in, but we had to have either a fire or a police person with us, and only one person could go into the building at a time. So for instance, we got in, we had people with trucks, and were ready to take stuff away once I got in. And the fire guy would go in with me, and we'd load stuff into 50-gallon drums or whatever containers we had to take it out, things that we thought we could salvage, on a hand truck. But I'd load, take it to the door, somebody would take it away, and that fire person stayed with us. And then at some point that that stopped, and they just said okay, and then we just had wet, muddy mess. Yeah, just wet, muddy mess.
That's quite a process. I mean, how long did it take you to actually get all that done?
Well, we got everything out of the building probably within a week. And we took everything out, completely, because everything was wet, but all the fixtures, everything. And then it was 3 months. We ran humidifiers and, dehumidifiers is what I mean to say there, and to try to dry it out. I think it actually probably took a year before the underpinnings and everything were actually dry.
Mm-hmm. How long before you actually opened back up for business?
We were back at 3 months. Yeah, it took us 3 months before we were able to go back in and, reset everything and open.
In terms of the stuff that you were able to salvage,
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound like a very silly question, but what does water do to yarn, essentially? Is it something that can be fixed if you dry it, or does it basically make it unusable?
I would say 90% unusable, but some things were not as impacted. So we did have a situation that was kind of interesting. So the building right on the upper end, what we call the Parkview building, or it was called the Parkview building, has a basement. And some of the buildings have basements and some don't. Our building did not have a basement. It just had a crawl space. So when they tried to redirect the water and it was pushing into that upper building, which then filled with rock, the water was coming in through the mortar joints in the brick. So it was like little waterfalls. And then the water, because of the basement hydraulic, was pushed our floor up about 6 inches. Yeah. And then everything that was attached to the wall, like the shelving, fell over. So, scrambled eggs kind of stuff. And so some things were good, and stuff we had taken upstairs, because we had an upstairs office and storage space, of course, was fine. But pretty much if it was wet, it was dead. Yeah.
Do you have a recollection of like an estimate of how much damage there was to your store in particular?
Whoa. Well, I would say we lost 90% of our inventory, which is a substantial number, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, the loss of the time in the store, when we were able to do business, and then the process of rebuilding it. People just volunteered. They just came in. Once we were in the buildings, they put dumpsters out on the plaza, and we shoveled mud and we shoveled stuff, and it would go away, and then we'd shovel some more until we had it completely clear. Yeah, and we have photos of that, so it is interesting. You can actually see that water line on the brick once everything was out of the building. That it takes a long time to dry. Floods are like that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The theme that I have heard that is universal from everybody I've talked to so far, and you now, is that there was this real sense of people coming together.
Yeah.
And helping each other out. I was hoping you could take me through that from your standpoint, what you saw, what you experienced.
Well, coordinating volunteers, of course. We have our group of friends and customers who just would call and say, what can I do? And they would come to the house and help us process orders. We had people, it's amazing. I have a lot of yarn, but not everybody keeps as much yarn as I do. I was like, oh, people still want yarn. So we switched our phone over, we switched our UPS deliveries and everything over. So we basically ran the business out of our house. And so employees, we kept all of our employees on the payroll. They came, answered phones, delivered orders to people locally who couldn't get out or whatever. We shared our house, our food, all of the things, because people in town didn't have water because that water system was down. It was amazing. Yeah.
Or did you see that of business to business too? Like, would other businesses go and help other businesses, or?
We certainly communicated with each other, and I think that there wasn't like someone would only volunteer to help me. People were very, very generous, and so there was a lot of crossover. And yeah, it was a real community effort. It was good.
I have to imagine that when you first got back in the store, see the damage, see the water, just how overwhelming that would be. Can you give me a sense of what you felt initially when you saw the damage?
Well, the sequence and the speed at which everything happened is, it's, unless you've been in a flood, I guess, and we certainly hadn't had that experience, is really amazing that something like that could happen. It could happen that quickly, and it could do as much damage as it did. That's beyond comprehension. And try to plan for another event, I suspect they would always be different. Yeah.
For sure. You said it was about 3 months before you opened back up.
Yes.
In terms of the plaza as a whole,
yes.
When did you get a sense that things were sort of back to normal? Stuff is mostly cleared away, water's back on.
Well, I think, water came on, and I think city was only out of water for a couple of weeks. So that corrected itself or was taken care of pretty quickly. Time-wise, businesses were open and back and going. Of course, it was only the plaza. Water didn't go into City Hall building. The plaza and down right to Water Street were, it was a directly impacted area. And there were other creeks in Ashland besides the plaza where there were homes and stuff that were flooded. So, it just depended on the drainage and the timing and where people had built. And, why do we have a downtown that's in the flood zone? But it's there, and it's been there a long time. So, yeah.
In, I think it was 2005, we had another sort of not even close to as
No.
fierce as that, but it was there was some flooding.
Mhm.
When that started to happen, do you remember ever thinking to yourself, "Oh God, here we go again," or was it like, let's just kind of wait and see?
Well, we always paid attention. I had, water level marks in the creek below the bridge and stuff that I could spot every day, whether it was up or down. And we certainly had more of a plan this time. I mean, like, okay, this is the first thing we do. Of course, as time went on, digitally, things can be stored, so you're not going to lose everything if you lose that. And knowing there's certain inventory that, or you're going to take your safe and you're going to take your money and you're going to take those things out if you think there's any risk involved there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned earlier just about the advances in communication, how you borrowed this enormous cell phone.
Yes. No cell phones then.
Yeah, this is an enormous phone.
Mm-hmm.
The advent of communication, it being so much more convenient through text and other things now. I mean, would having that type of technology back then have made things easier for you, do you think? Or was it just, it was so bad that no matter what?
It would have helped. Yeah. I mean, I think we have a real advantage now. As I said, for one thing, I mean, you don't have to remove a hard drive or, take things away. You can access everything. You wouldn't lose all your accounting or your business functions. You wouldn't lose your customer database or, those were all things that were basically the business in and of itself that we would have to physically take because we wouldn't have been able to take it then. So yeah, and communications, just, talking to city, whatever, all of those things definitely would have been easier. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
In terms of all of the things that you mentioned that can be stored electronically now,
Mm-hmm.
Payroll, business records, stuff like that. Did you lose any of those things?
No, we did not. No, we took everything out and or moved it to upstairs.
That's good.
So yeah, we had that option. We were moderately prepared, but not prepared to really actually have water that deep inside the store in the building. Yeah.
Are there any takeaways that you gleaned from that event that you've carried with you to this day?
Well, out of all disasters usually come some good things. And that is community-based and how resilient people are and what a great community we have.